Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My name is Molly McLaughlin, and I own a company that optimizes sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change. Each week, I'll be interviewing world-class experts ranging from doctors, innovators, and thought leaders to give actionable tips and strategies that you can implement to become a more skillful sleeper. Let's jump into your dose of practical sleep training. Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. I had a blast recording this podcast with Dr. Wendy Troxel, Ph.D. So she's an internationally recognized leading authority on couples and sleep and is the author of Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. She is a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation and holds adjunct faculty positions at the University of Pittsburgh and University of Utah. Now, Dr. Troxel is a licensed clinical psychologist and certified behavioral sleep medicine specialist with more than 15 years of clinical and research experience in sleep medicine. So her work has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, private foundations, and corporations, and has been published in top-tier medical journals. She serves as a scientific advisor for several corporations and is a member of the National Institutes of Health Sleep Disorders Research Advisory Board. Now, in addition to her academic credentials, Dr. Troxel is a highly sought-after public speaker, and her work has been featured by numerous media outlets, including The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, ABC World News Tonight, ABC Sunday Morning, NPR, and the BBC. She's also a regular contributor to HuffPost, Thrive Global, and Psychology Today. Now, Dr. Troxel's TED Talk has received over 2.2 million views and is at the forefront of national conversations concerning the impact of early school start times on adolescent sleep. Ariana Huffington called her one of the 5 most influential people in sleep, saying, "Wendy Troxel is on the front lines of the sleep revolution." Again and again, her research shows just how fundamentally sleep affects every aspect of our lives. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this very exciting podcast. All right, you all, I'm so excited to announce our new sponsor, Soul CBD. When I was at my lowest point dealing with my insomnia, CBD was one of the key compounds that I leaned into to combat my crippling anxiety, calm my nervous system, and support my journey to entrain my circadian rhythm. But of all the brands out there, where can you go that you can have a strong trust in their quality? Well, Soul CBD is completely THC-free, organically farmed, gluten-free, and third-party tested for toxins. Now, one of the things that is great about Soul is that they aim to help create rituals around your CBD use. And sleep and rituals are best friends. For instance, I love that Soul CBD supports a nighttime bath routine with their CBD bath bombs, which help to combat stress, soothe aching muscles with a mix of CBD essential oils and dead sea salts. Another ritual that we aim to cultivate in the realm of sleep optimization is circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, which is really all about eating your meals between sunrise and sunset. And Soul CBD has very popular gummies that can serve as a nighttime dessert or treat to look forward to without caving to ice cream. Nice alternative. My go-tos personally are their oils, capsules, topicals, and even CBD bath bombs. It's helpful for anyone who struggles with anxiety, pain, or sleep. Now, particularly when I'm traveling, I like to lean into as many things as possible to help with inflammation, and CBD does just that. Now, here's a really cool part. You get 15% off automatically and free shipping when you go to mysoul.com/sleep is a skill. I'm going to say that again. You get 15% off automatically. All you have to do is go to this link, which will be in the show notes, mysoulcbd.com/sleep is a skill. All right, let's get on to the show. And welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. I'm really excited for my guest today. Oh, Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate you. I know we were introed by our mutual friend, Dr. Michael Bruce. Anyone who's listening is likely familiar with him or his work. And I'm really excited to take the time today for us to dive in deeper to learn about your work, because we really haven't discussed the topic that we're aiming to dive into at all on this podcast in depth. We've alluded to it, but we haven't devoted an entire episode to couples in sleep, relationships in sleep, getting into this topic of sleep divorce, very charged lingo and language. So without further ado, I would love to just one, introduce you, and two, just thank you for taking the time. So if you can just share a little bit about how you got into this space and how this relates to our goal of really making sleep a skill.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and so happy that Dr. Bruce introduced us.
Yes.
So how did I get into this space? Well, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and actually a clinical and health psychologist. So I study how psychological and social factors in our lives influence not just our mental health, but also our physical health and our risk for disease. And throughout my career, I've always really been interested in why our relationships matter for our health. So we know that married or partnered people live longer, happier, and healthier lives than their unmarried or unpartnered counterparts. But we don't really know how that happens. And so early on in my career, I was doing research in this space and, demonstrating that, women who are in high quality relationships have lesser risk for heart disease. But I wanted to understand sort of the pathway underlying that. And that's really how I arrived at sleep. Because at the time, and this was, 20 or so years ago, there was more and more research coming out on the vital importance of sleep, as we all know now, for all aspects of our health, including our risk for heart disease. But I got to thinking, well, wait a second, sleep is this vital health behavior reliably linked with all these really important health outcomes. And it happens to be the one health behavior that couples routinely share together. And yet no one in the sleep space really was systematically trying to understand what it means to share a bed, what it means to sleep with a partner, and how are our relationships affected by our sleep, and how is our sleep affected by our relationships. So I kind of stumbled upon this area and realized, wow, it's this wide open gap in the field. And yet it matters so much to real human beings that it's also really important scientifically to understand why is it that most people share a bed, and what are the potential benefits and what are the potential consequences. That's really where I began.
Ah, that's fantastic. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of, or I know even on your TED Talk, you get this question all the time it sounds like maybe one of the most popular questions that you're getting routinely is it bad if I am not sleeping in the same room with my significant other, or if I'm considering, kind of having this quote unquote sleep divorce? So I know there's a lot in that question, and wondering if that might be a great place for us potentially start is kind of breaking down what comes up and what are the things we need to know from that domain of relationships and sleep. Why is it important to really kind of parse this out in particular?
Sure. Yeah, well, honestly, that's, again, one of the reasons why I thought it was so important to systematically study from a scientific perspective this critically important question that matters in real people's lives. And we have so many beliefs and stigma attached to the meaning of the marital bed. And yet with no science to guide us, it really sort of fluctuates based on the whims of society. And by the way, our beliefs or the stigma attached to sleeping together or apart have varied dramatically across the ages, right? So like back in the day, if anybody watches The Crown, for instance, back in the day, it was de rigueur for, the wealthy couples to sleep apart. So you would sleep apart if you could afford to do so. And again, this has shifted throughout history. It really was around the time of, the 1960s, the sexual revolution, that we showed this other dramatic shift where we started to, ascribe this like significant meaning to the marital bed, where if you didn't sleep together, that was necessarily the sign that your relationship was falling apart. And we still hold that belief in many circles today, even though many couples more and more are choosing that sleeping apart may be the right arrangement for them. But there's still like so much judgment around this. And that's why, I speak about this a lot. It's why I wrote my book in part to cover this and other topics that, the words we use, sleep divorce, that's laden with judgment, right? How can you have the word divorce associated with anything to do with your relationship that doesn't have a negative connotation? And so I wanted to sort of bring the science and bring the awareness to the fact that, guess what? There's actually very little evidence that there's one size fits all sleeping strategy that's going to work for all couples. And what the science does clearly show us, and what I think people are less aware of, is that what we do know is that sleeping well is not only vital for your own health and physical and mental health, but it's also vital for your relationship health. So let's move away from this idea that we all should be following some socially prescribed norm that may or may not work for you. If it does, that's great. But if it doesn't, you don't have to feel judged about it. Instead, let's move the conversation to how can we sleep better together or apart? And in doing so, how can we actually do something that's vitally important for improving our relationships? So that's really sort of a major message that I get asked about all the time.
I'm sure.
Because there's so much misconceptions around it.
Well, I'd appreciate you kind of going back into a bit more of the history of this and breaking this down, because I think that's so important. One of the things we do a lot at Sleep as a Skill is looking kind of from an ancestral perspective around our sleep and how we've gotten away from some of, that kind of natural hardwired biological innate structures, whether that's certain timing cues and different things that we're looking to have a blueprint for in the midst of a society that might be running outside of that kind of original, language or way of being. So for you to bring that in on this topic of couples and relationships and what this means, all the heavy meaning that we can make out of it is really, really helpful, because we can start to then deconstruct what we might have originally thought is what needs to be, or what is a demonstration of a great relationship. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
So wondering if you can share more too on that topic, and maybe some around the area of some of the things that you're seeing that come in again and again. Because certainly I'm hearing tons of it with some people want, it cold, some people want it hot, some people there's snoring involved, there's different schedules, there's different sleep rhythm preferences, there's different lighting preferences. There's just a huge area. So if you can help us kind of, how should we think of this in like a framework?
Yeah. Well, I love the stem of this question, because it's really one of the things that I find most fascinating about the intersection of couples and sleep, because in many ways, I feel like sleep is a window, as our relationships, into sort of the most vulnerable aspects of our sort of existence. So if you think about it, sleep is, from an evolutionary standpoint, a really vulnerable state to be in.
Yes.
You're semi-conscious, lying down, in our evolutionary past, really, that's a state that's quite vulnerable to threats from the environment. And yet we absolutely, for our survival, need to sleep to survive.
Yes.
So how did we evolve to preserve sleep as this fundamentally important aspect of our biology? But how do we feel safe in an unsafe sort of state? And that's where relationships play such a critical role. And there's this beautiful intersection, because we as human beings are hardwired as social beings. So we derive a sense of safety and security, particularly during times of threat, which the nighttime historically has always been. We derive that safety from our connections with others. So when we think about how our beliefs and patterns of sleep in a social aspect have changed over time, the truth is, way back in the day, like in medieval times, sleep was it wasn't a marital bed, it was a communal bed. First of all, bedding was typically the most expensive piece of furniture that anyone would have in a household. So they couldn't afford, multiple beds, besides the fact that for both warmth and security, you slept in social groups. And that, again, then that changed over time. We see in the Victorian era, separate beds for those who could afford it. And then the shift again around sexual revolution, where, it became the thing for couples to sleep together. But again, this idea, the intersection between our social lives and sleep has always been there, but it's sort of overlaid by cultural norms of the time. So that said, the fact that, again, we can see sort of this evolutionary connection between the importance of social connection to make us feel safe and secure, particularly, by the way, in high quality relationships. Not all relationships make you feel safe and secure. And that's really important for people to realize too. But that connection with needing to be able to fall into deep, good quality sleep. Ideally, we have social environments that support feelings of safety and security. So we see that connection sort of throughout history, and it's probably hardwired as human beings. What's also really interesting about sort of these historical trends, and when you think about sort of the role of safety and security in sleep and in relationships, it also speaks to some of the contradictory findings that the research shows concerning that. The very question is, well, do people sleep better when sleeping together or apart? So the findings are really interesting. When we measure sleep objectively, like wearing wrist-worn devices called actigraphs or similar devices. And these really measure motion at night and are a good indicator of sleep fragmentation. When we measure sleep objectively in that way, we actually see that people, when they share a bed with their partner, they objectively sleep a bit worse than on nights when they're sleeping alone. But interestingly, that same research will show that if you ask those same people, well, do you prefer to sleep with your partner or do you prefer to sleep alone? Those same people will say that they prefer to sleep with their partner and that they sleep better when sharing a bed. So I think what this absolutely speaks to is, again, that psychological benefit that's probably hardwired that many of us experience when sharing a bed because we feel that safety and security, even if at times, objectively, it comes at a cost to our sleep. So that's sort of what the research says. And then the other point about this, to your question about sort of like, well, there's lots of things that two individuals in a bed can differ on, right?
Yes.
That said, I think it's important for people to realize, okay, the fact that it might not be an easy solution because there's this sort of psychological benefit. At the same time, from a physics standpoint, when you share a bed, you got two people to deal with.
Yes.
So potential for double the problems, right? So it doesn't mean that it's going to work for everyone. And just because you love another human being does not mean that you're going to be perfectly sleep compatible with them, right? So there are plenty of issues that couples do face, and there are solutions for them. You may have differences in temperature preferences. She likes it hot, he likes it cold. You may have differences in mattress preferences. One likes it firm, the other likes it soft. You may be different in terms of your circadian rhythms. One of you is a morning lark, one of you is an evening owl. Or maybe there's a presence of a sleep disorder. One of you has insomnia and is just a really restless or light sleeper. So any movement from your partner is going to wake you up and then you feel resentful about it. So there's all these things that even in happy couples, I mean, it doesn't mean you don't love the human being, but when you put two in a bed in a shared space, there is automatically the opportunity for issues and also an opportunity for negotiation and compromise and problem solving.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited. I loved how you said, yes, there's so many things that might come up and there are solutions available, which I'm so happy that you're saying this because sometimes it's likely people listening might be listening at different stages of the game of their relationship or emerging relationship. And for some, it's just been years and years, and it's just sort of been a resignation. Well, this is how it is, or surviving it or suffering through it, or, having that building resentment, lots of different maladaptive ways of handling this. So like a bright light, you're coming in and helping us. What are some of these solutions? What have you seen? And if there's ever a point too, if you want to share too about your thoughts on that sleep divorce title. So take it any direction you want to go. I know there's a lot of questions, but.
Sure. So the first thing, and again, one of the reasons I write about this, that I have my book, is that we just don't have a dialogue around this. I mean, and think about it, as you said, from the initiation of a relationship through long-term relationships, sleep issues can play a big role. But culturally, we're not sort of primed to know how to talk about this. Like, think about any dating app. Do they talk about, differences in, sleep-wake schedules? One of you is an extreme morning lark, the other's an evening owl. I don't think that there are many dating apps that include that in your profile. Do we include in premarital coaching anything about, well, how compatible are you at night? Because by the way, 1/3 of our lives are spent asleep. So proportionally, that becomes a huge part of your coupled existence. And yet we're not talking about it. So the first thing is starting to create a dialogue wherever you are in your relationship about your sleep patterns and preferences. If we can start that dialogue early on with a partner and really normalize that the default solution for everyone isn't always going to bed with your partner at the same time and waking up at the same time in the same bed because that's, what society says you should do. Instead, having a dialogue and maybe discovering, oh, well, my partner likes to go to bed far earlier than I feel comfortable or that my circadian rhythm will allow me to go to bed. And if I'm going to get in bed at 10 p.m., but I don't actually fall asleep till midnight, that could create problems for me because I'll get frustrated. So first, just starting that dialogue about sleep as a critical and proportionally in terms of time, a major part of your relationship. That's one tip that I would give people of just, starting to ask about it. And I have some quizzes and strategies in my book to support that. The second thing, because for many people where sleep issues and relationship issues really hit a sort of crisis point, it's often due to a sleep disorder in one or both partners. So absolutely, if, snoring is a big culprit, by the way, snoring is not just a nuisance. It could be a sign of a significant sleep disorder. So if, you're thinking about stomping out of the room and going to the other room because you can't stand your partner's snoring anymore, I get it. But also use that as a cue to maybe gently and in a supportive way, encourage your partner to go seek medical treatment to find out if it's a sleep disorder. Short of that, some other solutions that deal with the kind of common issues that come up in the bed with different sleep preferences. Now more than ever, there's lots of products available that even in a shared sleep space, it allows for individualized preferences. So whether we're talking about individualized heating and cooling preferences, individualized firmness preferences of the mattress, there's a technique called the Scandinavian method, which is essentially two twin beds put together equals a king. And so for those who still feel that there's stigma attached to having separate beds, but that's what's really going to work for you because, maybe your partner tosses and turns or steals the sheets or likes it really hot and you like it cold. This will allow for the appearance of, a king size bed, but you can have separate bedding and in fact, separate mattresses. So that's a strategy as well. Then there's also, sort of other practical strategies depending on, what the problem is. If it's noise, you might try a noise coming from your partner, like snoring.
Yes.
You can try. There's a variety of different earplugs. And I really do recommend you just need to experiment with what works for you because comfort is an individualized preference. And, there's lots of types of earplugs out there. I do recommend that people experiment using eye masks. If one of you wakes up earlier than the other, goes to bed earlier than the other. And again, the key here is open and honest communication. Having these conversations about what's working and what's not working and trying to come up with compromise is not a sign that there's something wrong with your relationship. That's actually a sign of a healthy relationship because healthy couples can and do negotiate problems that occur both day and night. And then, of course, one more thing regarding sleep divorce, that is, yes, another solution. I would prefer to call it something other than sleep divorce because, that connotation is really not helpful in the context of a relationship. So, solo sleeping or temporary sleep separations. I think that couples need to find what works best for them. This strategy is particularly helpful if, for instance, if snoring is a big issue and it's not being, and provided that the sleep disorder is addressed. For some people, separate beds in the same room won't be enough. So separate rooms are an option. And if that's the case, by the way, I've talked to many couples who swear by this technique and say that it's, in fact, far from being the death knell of the relationship. It's actually been the thing that keeps them together, that they wake up in the morning happy to see their partner because they're well slept. And they have this like mini reunion in the morning. Some couples may choose to sleep separately on a temporary basis during the weekday when they're both really stressed and might have different work schedules. But then they have these nice reunions, which can actually enhance intimacy on the weekends. So lots of strategies. And if couples would just be willing to commit to and engage in the vital conversation about this third of our lives, which is sleep, and consider it in the context of your relationship, I think there's lots of ways to problem solve and lots of solutions out there that can help in this process.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you for tackling all of those kind of layers, because I know there's a lot there. And I appreciate beginning with the dialogue and the communication, because, even before we started recording, kind of speaking to loosely drawing parallels between exercise and nutrition in this realm of wellness. And there's often dialogues, or at least conversation around, I'm a vegan, I'm a carnivore, I'm testing out keto, I'm whatever it might be. And in the same token with exercise, I like HIIT, I like yoga, I cycle, I whatever. There's lots of things and demonstrations of these elements. And people might get trainers, they might get nutritionists, they might really just stay in this conversation, how to make this all relevant. And you're bringing to the forefront this thing that we are doing a third of our lives, that this is a place to begin having this conversation, very much so. And I'm not sure if it was in maybe an article that I had read of yours or what have you, because you've got great TED Talks. Anyone listening should definitely check out your TED Talks, your book, your articles, like tons of content. So, and we'll share in the show notes and what have you, links to those, of course. One of them, I believe you had gone in deeper about, even just from a more in that mindset perspective of that this is an opportunity for us to really take seriously our relationship and set ourselves up for success. And then to your point around the following morning, when we're really well rested, then we're able to bring the most to our relationship. So versus just sort of a giving up on an area of a relationship, this is, intention to really underscore it, make it even stronger. We need some new marketing, to your point, maybe solo sleeping with sleep dates, or I don't know, something. But we need one of the things you said on your TED Talk, I think, was unconscious uncoupling, was another phrase that, some people have spoken to. So many things, big topics. And yet what I've seen for so many people is, kind of just this giving upness of it as, the wife likes the drapes the way they are, or my hubby is, he's always been a snorer, is a snorer. And you might speak to, we got to really get this checked out about the snoring factor, or light is important, and sometimes it's that underscoring. It seems to be just sort of that's how it is. So how do we really get in there and create this sense of urgency, or even just begin the importance for people to really make some positive changes in alignment with some of these problems that you spoke to?
Yes. Well, I think culturally, we're still in a space that there's a tendency to undermine the importance of sleep in general. Yes. And obviously we've moved, a long way from the early stages of sleep when we had to convince people that sleep matters. But still, there is a tendency to, sleep is the last thing we do when everything else gets done.
Yes.
And, and there's many people who still think that, sleep is for the weak, or, it's taking away from, all the things we want to get to do. So I think bringing the relational piece into it also adds another motivator, because, what I said actually in my TED Talk is, by the way, if you're not going to, prioritize sleep for yourself, do it for, those around you, including your closest relationships. Because the research clearly shows that when you're well slept, you're a happier person, you're healthier, you're a better communicator, you're less prone to conflict, you're less prone to the development of mood disorders like depression and anxiety. And that plays a big role in the health of your relationship. There's even studies that show that when, in laboratory studies, if you sleep deprive somebody for a short amount of time, they show a reduction in what's called empathic accuracy, which is essentially your ability to read your partner's emotions. You also show an increase in your likelihood of engaging in conflict. And so when you think about this from a relational perspective, everybody knows, like, if you have a bad night of sleep or lots of bad nights of sleep, you get irritable, you're more likely to snap. But think about it this way: who are you most likely to take out those bad moods and irritability on? Your partner, the person that you lean on the most. So again, if you're not going to sleep for yourself, let's elevate the conversation and think about how critical this is to preserve and maintain and support the quality of our closest relationships. And here's where we get back to my original research. Relationships are central to our health. So sleep is not only foundational for supporting our own mental and physical health, but it's also central to maintaining our relationship health, which in turn also predicts our longevity and our health over time. So, I think it's partly, changing the conversation and thinking not only about the importance of sleep for our own lives, but how it fits in our social lives as well, and how protecting and preserving sleep can also be a really powerful strategy for protecting and preserving our closest relationships.
Really, really good points there. Yeah, we had an anthropologist on the podcast quite a while back, but I still often think of he kind of would call things social capital. So you would have your sleep capital and you would invest in that routinely, but there might be times, so he was speaking to this in the terms of sometimes deviating from your sleep schedule for sake of your social capital, because it's so important from a kind of tribal perspective and ancestral perspective that we want to feel connected with others. And that in turn bidirectionally will affect our sleep. So, big conversation, but really,
Super cool.
yes, really cool. Might have to connect you guys. I feel like
yes,
you
I love
each
stuff.
other.
Wow.
Yes, fantastic. And I love what you're saying, because it's 100%. And this is, now we're getting into, I'm waxing into this other topic of just, it's such an important choice of who you fall asleep with each night and who you wake up with each morning. And that partner, it's just absolutely can color your experience of your life and your sleep. So say we're in this crossroads of we're having the dialogue, we've weighed the situation, and there's two choices. So we might either decide, okay, let's explore separate bedrooms, separate possibilities as far as, really having our own separate spaces. And then there's the other path of, okay, we're going to make this work. How can we make this work with really a sense of intentionality and really be aware of what we're creating? What are some of those two paths that we might want to be mindful? Are there frameworks to think within that? Yeah, go ahead.
So ultimately, it's going to come down, the solution really comes down to what's the source of the problem.
Yeah.
And depending on the source, is it that, one partner it's noise disruption because of snoring or something else, or the one partner is just a light sleeper and has very sort of specific sleep preferences, or is it, a child coming into the room? There's lots of things, or you have different sleep-wake patterns. So the solution really depends on the problem.
Yeah.
But to give one example, let's say that the issue is with different sleep-wake schedules. Maybe this is because one of you works, shift work hours, or maybe it's because you have different intrinsic circadian preferences, with one being more of a morning person and one being an evening person. I like this example, and I see it a lot in my clinical work, and also to discuss it in my book. This is a real challenge for many people. And I think it's a good example because it gets back to, and I think it relates to your broader point of sometimes the social need can conflict with the need for sleep. And so how do we sort of balance that and prioritize both? And so what I usually say in this situation, when you have like early morning lark, somebody who wakes up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at the crack of dawn, and then you have an evening owl who really doesn't hit their stride till 10 a.m., but feels great in the late evening hours. What happens often is, one partner, and it's typically the evening person, has to just go along for the ride with the morning person. And they often feel really judged and, maligned, because we happen to live in a culture that really tends to view morningness as a virtue. And people who are biologically predisposed to be night people, they somehow are maligned as being lazy or, not getting their lives together. So what often happens in couples, and I see this all the time, is that the night owl will sort of be forced to just follow along with the morning person's schedule and starts trying to go to bed hours before their biological clock tells them they're ready. So what do? They get in bed because they feel they should, and they want to be with their partner. And that's important for closeness. So they get in bed with their partner at their partner's bedtime, which is 10 p.m. The morning lark easily falls asleep at 10 p.m. The evening owl lies there awake and frustrated, and might even start having insomnia symptoms because they're spending hours in bed trying to sleep and failing at it because their biology isn't ready for sleep. So what I say to these couples is, to be honest with you, well, first of all, you can't change your intrinsic circadian rhythms. That's largely hardwired. And the evening owl has just as much as a right and a, sort of genetic predisposition to their circadian preference as the morning person. But for many couples, what's most important and what's most important for that connection that we derive from sleeping together is actually the time before falling asleep. So if you're on different schedules or for whatever reason, sleeping together throughout the night doesn't work for you, then maybe try to practice the habit of preserving and protecting that critical time before falling asleep as a time to cuddle and be intimate and be together. But that can mean that at the time that the morning person goes to bed at an earlier time, when it's their time for bed, the evening person gets out of bed, goes about, enjoys their evening, and quietly returns to the bed or another room at the time that's more consistent with their circadian rhythm. So what you're getting out of that, and this can apply to lots of couples, is really creating ritual before bedtime, or maybe it could be in the morning. But really for couples, I think what we're losing is that time together in bed that precedes or follows sleep. And instead, what we're doing is, couples, even those who share a bed, are on their individual devices or phones, connecting, remotely with somebody instead of using the opportunity to connect with that live human being that you care about who is right next to you in bed. And again, from that safety and security perspective and setting up a strategy to promote healthy sleep, there's nothing better than holding a hand, being intimate, cuddling, talking, even just digesting the stresses of your day in real time with your partner before you fall asleep. And that doesn't mean that you have to spend the rest of the night together, but sometimes it's that connection and that ritual that can be shared and should be shared with a partner before bedtime that can really promote both relationship quality and sleep quality.
Wow, really great points there. And just real quick, touching on that rituals piece, I think that was so well said, because really reminding each other, the listener, that there's this, we can design this to look however we want it to look and really to work within our lifestyles. Are there any rituals that have come to mind that you've seen that to be particularly noteworthy that people might be able to test out? For instance, I have top of mind, I've seen people do cool kind of gratitude rituals before bed where they share, things they're grateful for. Are there certain things that you've seen just might be to get people's ideas and wheels spinning if there maybe it hasn't been as empowering of a ritual that they have right now? Anything cool that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. So one of the exercises I describe in my book, again, it builds on, we have a lot of research on sort of individual level exercises and strategies like practicing gratitude as part of a bedtime ritual. And so what I do is I bring sort of the relationship research and field into this to sort of merge, what can you do that's both a healthy sleep promoting ritual, but also one that can promote healthy relationships. So one of the techniques I describe in my book is called a high-low compliment. And it's very similar to a gratitude practice, but it happens in the context of a couple. So you take turns and with each person first describing a high point of their day, something good that happened, something that you feel proud about that was funny or just, made you feel happy. A low point, maybe something that didn't go so well that you feel frustrated about or still kind of pondering. And then a compliment. You share a gratitude towards your partner. Thanks for making me coffee in the morning. It can be little. By the way, these little sort of small acts of kindness to your partner, there's a great deal of relationship research that shows, and this actually it gets back to a point you said earlier about social capital. That actually healthy relationships in part are built not on these massive, large gestures of buying your partner a diamond ring, or taking them on some, wonderful trip, all of which is good. But actually, the foundation of relationships is really these small but consistent kind gestures towards your partner. So disclosing something good that happened, something not so good that happened, and then sharing a compliment with your partner before bedtime. That's not only, kind of setting you up in an emotional state that is good for sleep, but it's kind of paying back some of this and feeding that social capital in your relationship. So you have this reserve of goodwill within your relationship. And what we know from the relationship side of things is, of course, every couple goes through conflict. Every couple has issues come up. That does not mean that it's a unhealthy relationship. Healthy relationships have conflict. It's how couples get through conflict that matters. And having this reserve of goodwill within your relationship also feeds back to it kind of it allows you to weather the difficult points because you have this reserve of connection and goodwill. So you can kind of forgive your partner when they screw up a bit.
Yes. No,
So it has both relational and sleep benefits.
oh, that's so well said. I love how you're interweaving or marrying, no pun intended, the topics of sleep and relationship and being able to create this structure that you're doing each evening and potentially in the morning and these rituals to strengthen both areas, which is so fantastic. And it makes me think of what you said, kind of touching on that social capital concept. It makes you think of John Gottman, if you're familiar with his work, and doesn't matter if, people are fans of him or not, but I like the ratio analogy of a 5-to-1 ratio and having, for every maybe one sort of maybe less than stellar interaction that you have, then if we have balance it out with kind of the 5 positives, then that ratio can kind of be one. And obviously we don't have to be, ticking up a tally or anything, but it's a framework for us to think about of how we can have certain goalposts where we're creating opportunities to have those really empowering conversations by having structures or techniques like that. That's just creates and ensures that really occurs. So that's fantastic. And I'm clear that we're only just scratching the surface of your knowledge. So we might even have to have a part 2 or something at this point, but yeah, awesome. And maybe what we can do is glean some further information by understanding a bit of how you're really conducting, your relationship and your sleep, kind of rhythms and routines. So there's 3 questions that we ask every person that comes on the podcast. And so the first one is, what might we see with your nightly sleep routine? I'm sure it's dynamic. I know you're gearing up for lots of travel and cool things. And so I'm sure that we'll adjust and what have you, but what might we see that could be important?
I'm a pretty sort of basic, my nightly sleep routine is pretty basic. I never have trouble falling asleep. So for me, reading is very sleep inducing. So, I read a real live book,
So novel.
Like an actual book that I can hold. And to be honest with you, I'm asleep within 2 minutes. Nice. So I always have to save my real reading for other times of the day because it's like a soporific for me. I fall right to sleep. I do actually, I do share a bed with my husband. Everybody wants to know that, despite how much I, talk about couples can engage in lots of sleeping arrangements that work for them. This is what works for us. But actually, the game changer for me, I want to mention, is my nightly sleep routine has always remained pretty consistent. But like many people, COVID really, profoundly disrupted my routine, my family's routine. And I noticed that I had to do something different. So what I've changed and what's been the biggest game changer for me is not my bedtime routine, but actually my morning routine. Because I was finding, which I think many people were, which that, once sort of the, regular rhythms and constraints of life were removed, like I wasn't having to, wake up, get dressed and ready for meetings or get my kids, out the door for, in-person early school. I still had things to do, but like the morning just became really fluid. And through that, where I would start sort of like lounging around in bed, I noticed that sleep inertia, which is that, state where it's just hard to, get the cobwebs, out of your brain in the morning, that was persisting in the morning. And so I was, even though I'm sort of a morning person by nature, I was finding that I was really starting to slog through my mornings and I was kind of delaying, kind of getting going. So I started, I sort of recognized what was going on and I needed to have a change. So I drew from actually a close friend and colleague, Dr. Allison Harvey, who's at Berkeley, a brilliant sleep scientist. I drew from a technique that she's developed to deal with sleep inertia. And I kind of borrowed some of the techniques that work best for me. Her techniques, in case people are interested.
Please share.
It's called Rise Up, RISEUP. And I basically do the rise part of it. What that stands for, if I can get it right, that'll describe what I actually do. First of all, the R is for refrain from hitting the snooze button. And for me, that really means make my morning like wake up rapid, because I was sort of setting an alarm and hitting the alarm and then sort of getting up a few minutes later. But for me, and I know this to be true for my clients as well, you want wake up to be like ripping off a Band-Aid, make it happen as rapid as possible. The I is for increased physical activity. So I started the habit, and this has been definitely a game changer for me, of doing some form of very brief physical activity first thing in the morning. That might be, doing, 20 to 50 squats, or maybe holding a plank for, 10 seconds or 30 seconds. I find that just sort of increasing my heart rate first thing in the morning is really important. The S is for shower or splash your face with cold water. And this was the one that I was most resistant to, but has been the most effective thing of all. And that I think has improved not only my mornings, but all sorts of things throughout my day. I've actually started to do the cold shower routine.
Yes.
Have you tried this?
Amazing. Yes. I don't know if I shared, we have quite a big kind of biohacker, quote unquote, kind of influence here. So love that. Okay. Yeah. Share more.
Game changer. And again, people need to, consult with their doctor if you have heart issues, et cetera. But in terms of, wiping away sleep inertia, there's nothing better than that. Secondly, I find, and this was so important during COVID, that we lived in this gloom, daily gloom, and it felt like Groundhog Day. And I find that the cold shower, if I just do that first thing in the morning, that automatically I can just focus on that as I've just gotten done in 3 minutes, the hardest thing that I'll probably do all day. So it made the rest of the day look so like I can handle this. So it really, I think, was sort of a great strategy for mental fitness and resilience. And then the fourth thing that I now practice religiously, which is definitely supported by circadian science, is getting some morning light exposure.
Yes, thank you.
My dogs love it because I'm outside with them religiously every morning, even when, I live in Utah, so it's cold here, but it's sunny in the morning. And so those four things, a rapid awakening, a little bit of physical activity, a cold shower, and morning sunlight really help to set my day and not only help improve, how I feel during the day, but also set me up for sleep success that night.
Oh my goodness. So this is very kismet because I love that you shared about your morning routine, because actually that's one of the things we're bringing in going forward into later into the year is going to start adjusting these final questions and adding on the morning routine, because it's much more in alignment with kind of the ethos that we're leaning into, of that there's so much that you can do to support your sleep during the day from the moment you wake up and how you manage your day. And it can be arguably freeing so that we're not just focused on now at the time after we did all these other things that might have been maladaptive to support sleep. And instead of just focusing on right when we're getting into bed and now, I hope it happens. Instead, we can get into the driver's seat of our sleep and really learn all these techniques. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we're actually planning to add in that question and to make 4 questions. So thank you for really just preemptively addressing that. So it's like, and I love that you're so on really, even though it's dates back to practices of being more in alignment with the rhythms of nature and having to be exposed to some of these extremes, you're bringing in something that is new to some of the common conversation, which is that cold therapy and how that can be so impactful. We have a lot of people wearing continuous HRV trackers, and they've also noticed for themselves often changes in their HRV patterns by exposure to cold therapy. There's great apps out there if you want to kind of gamify this. And of course, I appreciate your call out to be mindful of health and well-being and bioindividuality. If you are engaging in this mindfully, then there's great apps that you can even kind of log your experience, log the temperatures. If you're doing cold baths, showers out in nature, in your space, your experience thereof. If you're wearing wearables, it can track kind of your heart rate throughout. Really just cool, ways to bring in these practices and to track the experience. So thank you for sharing that. And now you might have already touched on it, but the second question is, what might we see on your nightstand or even proverbial nightstand if you're traveling, or apps or supplements, ambiance, anything that might be helpful?
Actually, I didn't mention this as part of my sleep ritual, and it is something that I do love, and it's what I gift my friends with too. I do have a pillow spray. For me,
nice.
There's nothing like, just scenting my pillow before going to bed. It's also just another ritual of like, okay, cueing my brain. This is the thing I do before I go to bed. I'll always have a book. I have a lamp. And I also do have an eye mask, because sometimes my husband will wake up earlier than I will, or he'll go to bed later than I will. So I'll use the eye mask, but it's clean, it's tidy. This is another sort of recommendation I talk about in my book about, creating a sleep haven, not just for yourself, but for your relationship. And there's some strategies that are really simple that anyone can do. And again, it starts with a clean and tidy room. Get the laundry out of the room, particularly those of us who have children. The bedroom can be this place of just complete chaos. And we really want to, start by sort of removing the chaos and the reminders of our waking lives, including our family demands from the bedroom. And so mine is a pretty simple space. I try to keep it, just tidy and relaxing and comforting. Those are the sort of three sort of characteristics that I aim for in my bedroom environment.
Amazing. Really good call outs there. And then the last question would be, and again, you might have already spoken to this, but if anything else to add, if there is anything else to add, which is what has made the biggest change to your sleep game or been one of the biggest aha moments in managing your sleep?
Well, I think that morning routine changed most recently.
Yeah,
throughout my life, routines have shifted to some extent based on sort of family needs, whatever, and work obligations. But really focusing on the morning has been so critical to me, again, because I'm somebody who's always sleepy at night. And so I fall asleep quickly. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, but setting the day right and really sort of having a consistent morning rhythm is so important to me. So practicing those, sort of creating a morning ritual, which for me involves, a cold shower, light exposure, and a brief bout of physical activity has been absolutely critical for supporting how I feel during the day, boosting my energy level, getting rid of that sleep inertia. And I'm sleeping really well. And generally, I tend to sleep well to begin with, but that consistency, which was really going awry during COVID, particularly during the early months, that was really what I needed to sort of get myself in check and really set the tone for the rest of the day. And I think it's been absolutely critical for letting things not sort of go completely off the tracks.
Absolutely. No, that's so helpful. And I appreciate your vulnerability and kind of sharing the humanity that we all are, even if we're in this conversation 24/7 and you've been in this conversation for years and years, and yet there's still, from just virtue of being a human being, there's going to be times when sleep is kind of working and not working and ebb and flow, but really having that potential to experiment with new things. And life is dynamic and things are changing. And, what maybe worked for individual years back, maybe there's time for tune-ups and changes and adjustments. So really appreciate that. And I am clear that, as we said, we only just scratched the surface on this topic. And I think it's so important. I've already shared your site and book with different clients and people that might continue to, unfortunately, just still sort of survive this area or just turn the other cheek to, well, that's how it is. And instead, I really, really want people to absolutely know that there are so many resources that they can dive into if this is an area for them. And even if they might not be thinking of it, or maybe re-examine, are there certain things that you might not be aware of, that maybe there's micro awakenings throughout the course of your night that you haven't really fully registered, kind of doing a check-in of your relationship and your sleep, and doing a little bit of that relationship and sleep audit, and then really dive into some of the techniques and tools that you've displayed. So what are the best ways for people to stay connected to you? And of course, we'll add this in the show notes too.
Oh, great. Well, I have a website, wendytroxel.com. I'm on Instagram. It's sharing the covers. The title of my book is my handle there. And I'm also on Twitter, Wendy Troxel. And I would be delighted to, carry on the conversation with you. And, I want people to recognize that I think it's so easy for us to understand the vicious cycle that can ensue when you're not sleeping well.
Yeah.
And then you take it out on your partner in conflict. And then when you're in conflict with your partner, you then can't sleep well because you're thinking about it all night. But where there are vicious cycles, there's also opportunities for virtuous cycles. And if we can start thinking about this intersection between sleep and our relationships, we can think about promoting such a virtuous cycle with techniques to enhance our relationships, which can then, facilitate and promote healthy sleep. And healthy sleep can in turn feed back into healthy relationships. So it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. This is really about putting both sleep and relationships on a pedestal and practicing techniques that will actually positively feed back to improve both.
Oof, amazing. Well, such important work. Thank you for what you're doing out there in the world, and excited to be connected. So grateful to have this conversation and looking forward to more. So anyone listening, make sure to check out these resources. And if you know of people, if you're, having conversations with people and you're hearing that they're struggling with their sleep as a result or in relationship to their relationship, then make sure to recommend either listening to this podcast and then certainly getting the book, checking out Wendy's website. And again, we'll have all of that in the show notes. So just thank you so much for taking the time, and I want to stay connected to all the work that you're doing and getting out in the world.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Sleep is a Skill podcast, the #1 podcast for people who want to take their sleep skills to the next level. Every Monday, I send out something that I call Molly's Monday Obsessions, containing everything that I'm obsessing over in the world of sleep. Head on over to sleepisaskill.com to sign up.